Have you ever been absent and then returned after having a substitute only to find out 2 of your students switched names and seats for the day, half of your candy bin has been passed out to students, and a stack of 15 nurse notes because apparently half your class had a stomachache or headache all in one day? Because I have. Preparing for a substitute can be very overwhelming because you have so much information to communicate to your substitute, so you have to find an organized and concise way to do it. In today's video, I'm gonna show you all how I prepare for a substitute and give you 15 simple tips that will help your day with the substitute go just as smoothly as if you were there. Look, I know a lot of teachers, and I have yet to find one that actually enjoys writing subplans. As much as you may not enjoy it, you have to just be like Nike and do it.
Just do it!
For me, preparing for a substitute actually has 2 different parts. Number 1, preparing a substitute binder, and number 2, preparing your daily plans. My substitute binder is my way of communicating all of my classroom information, including procedures and schedules, with my substitute. Some teachers use a binder, and by some teachers, I mean me, while other teachers prefer to use some kind of foldable. It really doesn't matter as long as you figure out something that works for you. But I'm gonna show you inside of my substitute binder, that way you can see everything I include. So this is my substitute binder. It's a very, basic binder. I have a very simple binder cover on the front. Once you open it up, I do keep my sub-reports here on the left-hand side. I will talk about these later on in the video, but this is how I get feedback from my substitutes, and I typically keep several copies in here so I don't have to replace them throughout the year. Then over on the right-hand side is where I have all of the page protectors with, hopefully, all of my classroom information that the substitute will need. I always like to have a letter as the first page. That way it just welcomes the substitute and kind of gives them an overview of, hey, you're teaching 4th grade, we're departmentalized. If you need help, ask any of my team teachers. At any point during this part of the video, you can pause the video. That way you can read specifically what I wrote. I'm not gonna read this to you because I know you can read, but if you are interested in seeing exactly what I write, you can go ahead and just pause the video and get more information. So after my welcome letter is contact information. It's super important to leave this for the substitute. That way they can get a hold of people if necessary. I put a little bit of information on how to use the phone, and then I have contact information including both room numbers and extensions for my team teachers, the front office staff, special area teachers, and then anyone else that they may need, such as the nurse or the custodian. After the contact information are our schedules. So we have a lot of different schedules that we could possibly have to use. Our regular day schedule is obviously used most often, but we also have early dismissal days, 1-hour delay days, and 2-hour delay days. Now, typically I create my subplans based on whatever schedule we're supposed to have, but sometimes I could put in for a substitute and we could end up having a 1-hour or 2-hour delay and I didn't know in advance. So it's important to have all of the schedules available for the substitute, to follow. After the schedules is my class roster. Now I have 3 different groups of students, a homeroom group, a block 1, and a block 2. So I like to have the rosters all on one page. That way it's easy for the substitute to access. And I also put a little blurb at the top on how to take attendance. Next, I include my seating charts because, I don't want students trying to switch seats throughout the day. And again, because I have 3 different groups of students, I have a homeroom, block 1, and block 2 seating chart, and I include all 3 in my substitute binder. Next, I include some dismissal information because our students do go to different rooms for dismissal, so I want to make sure that the substitute knows exactly where students should be. So I just have a compiled list of our bus riders, car riders, walkers, and then any students who have some other form of dismissal. After that, I start to go into procedures. So I know this may look like overkill because the substitute is only in my room for a day at a time, but it's super important that they know what your procedures are. That way they can make sure that the students follow that. So I like to outline our arrival procedures and our dismissal procedures. I also outline our procedures for lunch, indoor recess, and outdoor recess. And then I also include information for different emergency drills that could possibly happen, or God forbid it not be a drill and it be reality. It's super important that the substitute knows exactly what to do. So I include information for a fire drill, a lockdown, shelter in place, and then some other drills that happen less frequently. The next piece of information I include is about classroom management. Ew, do you see that cat hair? Welcome to my life, my friends. So For management, I include information on my attention getters. Obviously, my substitute can feel free to create their own attention getters, but I do like to give them a few options of ones my students are familiar with. I also include information on how we do bathroom and drinks. This little blurb down here is just about monitoring students at their lockers. We tend to have a lot of students, lingering in the halls, running around, horseplaying, so I like to make sure the sub is aware of that and knows to be monitoring those students. Then I talk a little bit more in depth about student behavior, so I list out our classroom rules that students are expected to follow. I talk about management strategies. Now, I'm going to talk about this later in the video because I actually have my substitute do something different when I'm not there compared to our daily management strategies, because those are a little bit more in depth and difficult for a sub to follow. I also outline just simple rewards and consequences. That way the substitute is aware of those as well. Then I like to give my substitute some student info. So I do list out some helpful students. And again, I will talk about this later on in the video. I also give information on students that have allergies. Now, you want to double check with your school or your nurse to know what information you are allowed to share with a substitute or not. Different schools have different guidelines for that, but I like to provide information about student allergies. And then also any specific needs. If a student has preferential seating or maybe they're allowed to use a fidget toy of some kind, it's important to let the substitute know that in advance. The next page is all about supplies. So I like to give the substitute some information on like teacher supplies that they may need, and then some student supplies that they may need, and then some other things like bandages or tissues or wet wipes that they may need to locate within the classroom. The final page is all about technology. Not every substitute teacher is going to be tech savvy, so I do think it's important to leave detailed information on how to use the different pieces of technology within the classroom. So I have a section on the computer and how to access my files, how to use the projector, how to use the document camera, and then the procedures for our Chromebook cart. So this is my entire sub binder. Like I said, feel free to pause on any of those pages. That way you can see exactly what I wrote, and feel free to use that kind of as your base to create your own sub binder. I do sell my substitute binder template in my TPT store if you are interested, and it is newly updated. It is editable, so you can customize it to fit your needs. It also includes both a PowerPoint template and a Google Slide template, so if you are interested, check out the link in the description box. Now, my daily plans are where I detail out the activities and lesson for my substitute. It's basically like a play-by-play for the entire day. I'm gonna show you an example of my daily plans. That way you can see all the information I include and how I organize it. These are what my daily sub-plans look like. I like to leave very detailed sub-plans, probably more detailed than some other teachers leave, but I always feel more comfortable when I feel like I give too much information instead of not enough. I like to break down my sub-plans by the schedule, so I like to chunk it by each different activity, and within this top box, I have the time, and then the activity, and then detailed instructions. I've always gotten really, really good feedback from substitutes about this format, and everyone who has bought this template from me always says that their substitute always compliments the way that their sub-plans are laid out. So for me, this has worked really well, and it's what I stick with. So even though I have a lot of this information in my sub binder, realistically, I know that my substitute may not read that sub binder. So some of it I do reiterate within these little blurbs. That way they know the necessary information, and if they want to know in more detail, they can go into the sub binder. Within the arrival section, I just talk about how to access the PowerPoint for the day, make sure they have the projector on, and then kind of tells them what students should be doing as they enter the classroom. Then we have our morning meeting. So this is where they're showing the morning announcements, they're getting the lunch count, taking attendance, all that good stuff. So that's kind of detailed out for them. And then typically 9:35 to 10:35 is when we have planning, except for on Fridays. Fridays we have no planning. So we have a study hall time during that chunk of time. So I kind of outlined what students should be doing during the study hall time, and that continues onto this page as well. Then we start to break into our blocks. Now, my team teacher and I do switch classrooms for science and social studies every other week. So sometimes the substitute actually has to change classrooms, which is kind of confusing. So I just kind of explain that down here. I tell him or her what they need to take with them, and they can access the same slides in that classroom. And a lot of times, most of the information is actually in that PowerPoint, which again, I will talk about later in this video. But this is just kind of an overview of the steps that they should be following. Then we jump into math time, and again, I kind of let her know, hey, let him or her know, I'm sorry, the sub could be a boy or a girl. I let them know that our TA will be in during a certain time to be able to assist, and again, I just kind of outline what students will be doing, and that usually continues on to the next page. Then I start to give instructions on getting ready for lunch. And again, this is in my sub binder, but I kind of go through it again in my daily plans, and it just has exactly what they need to be doing for lunch. Then it goes down into my block 2. Again, they're switching classrooms. I always retype the information. Well, actually, I copy and paste. I don't retype it, but I do put the information in there a second time instead of just writing like, do the same thing you did this morning, because sometimes we actually end up having half-day subs. So I may have a different substitute in the morning than the afternoon. So I always like to detail it out again, just in case that does happen. So that continues on, and then block 2 math like normal. Then I've got my recess, and here I do tell them to refer to my sub binder for routines and procedures for indoor and outdoor recess, because I don't feel like retyping all that. So that's a pretty standard thing that I think most substitutes are used to. Then we go back into block 2 math, and I have all the directions they should be following for that. And then that takes us into the end of the day. So I have their directions for packing up, their directions for dismissal, and on the last page, I do have a little note for them to fill out a sub report. And again, I'll talk about this later in the video, but I feel like if I direct their attention to it, they're more likely to fill that out and then give me feedback. So all in all, my sub plans, they're like 5 pages long. It's a little bit excessive, but it's always worked out really well. I've never had subs not follow the sub plans because they are very detailed. So you don't have to use this same format. I'm sorry, there's a hair again. You don't have to use this same format. Just figure out a format that works for you, but this would at least give you an idea to go off of. I also sell my sub plan templates in my TPT store, and I do want to be clear, these are a separate product from the actual sub binder. But again, they are editable, so you can customize them. They include both PowerPoint templates and Google Slide templates, and they also include different clip art options. So if you are interested, just hit the little link-a-rooney in the description box and you can go purchase it. Now I'm gonna jump into my 15 simple tips to help your day with a substitute go by smoothly. Tip number 1, let your students know in advance. Listen, I know this is not always possible. Okay, sometimes emergencies come up. You don't have a chance to prep your kids. I get it, I do. But if at all possible, let your students know in advance that you are going to be absent. This gives you a chance to review the expectations you have of your students with the substitute to help prevent misbehavior. Also, we all know some students do not handle change well. So if you can let them know in advance that things are gonna be a little bit off while you're gone, that helps put them at ease. Tip number 2, let your students preview the assignments. Obviously, this only works if you know in advance that you're going to be out, but it does help make sure that students will follow the directions. I also think students are more likely to complete the assignment to the best of their ability if they've seen it in advance, they know your expectations. It never fails that if you don't show it to them in advance, they're not going to show any of their work, and they're going to just scribble all over the paper and not complete it the way that they're supposed to. Tip number 3, assign a few students as helpers. I do recommend pulling these students aside to let them know what their responsibilities are going to be ahead of time, and then make sure you communicate who these students are to the substitute. That way, if the substitute does need help, they know exactly who to reach out to. I do recommend having helpers for some different things. You know, you got to have someone who knows where your supplies are, you got to have someone who can help with technology, and then you should probably have someone who knows the teachers really well, knows where different teachers are located, and knows where different rooms are within the school. You also may want to choose one of your helpers to be a student who tends to have, you know, challenging behaviors, especially when there is a substitute. If you give the student a responsibility, you are helping to build trust, and then it is less likely that they will misbehave while you're gone. Tip number 4, avoid pointing out behavior issues. There are different opinions on this, but my personal opinion is that I'm a believer in self-fulfilling prophecy. So if I let a substitute know that students X, Y, and Z typically are challenging and have behavior issues, that substitute is going to be more likely to notice the behaviors in those students. I think every kid deserves a fresh start, and you never know. Sometimes kids surprise you, and sometimes kids that are challenging for you may get along really well with the substitute. So I prefer to just leave that information out, let the substitute figure it out on their own, and then if they need to reach out to my team teachers for support, they can. Tip number 5, have a unique sub incentive. Detailed classroom management strategies are great for a classroom teacher, but they're not always easy for a sub to follow. I recommend creating a simple incentive that the sub can use for that day or the group of days that you're gone, so it will be something new and fresh for students. This can be as easy as creating a poster, drawing a big donut on it, and having the sub draw on sprinkles every time the class is on task. You can decide ahead of time with the class how many sprinkles they have to earn in order to get the incentive, which could be something simple like extra recess time. Tip number 6, don't just leave worksheets. Listen, there is a time and a place for worksheets, okay? I'm not saying you can't leave any worksheets while there is a substitute, but I do recommend having maybe one worksheet followed by some kind of fun game or activity that students can play in partners or small groups. We all know worksheets are not super engaging, and guess what? When students get bored, that's when they tend to start acting out and misbehaving. If you have a worksheet followed by a fun activity, students are more motivated to get their work done because then they can participate in the fun activity, so it helps keep them focused. Tip number 7, all work left should be review. I highly do not recommend leaving a brand new conceptual lesson for a substitute to teach. Not all substitutes have received training or education on the best teaching practices, and they may not even feel comfortable teaching a brand new lesson. Plus, you have to think about your students. You may have students that struggle with the new material, and they're going to feel frustrated if you're not there to support them, and it's just going to break down their confidence. So just do everyone a favor and leave work that your students already know how to do. Tip number 8, organize and label the work. You can do this in a multitude of different ways. You can use color-coded binder clips, you can use sticky notes, you can use containers. You have to figure out what works for you. Personally, I like to differentiate my subjects using color-coded binder clips with a sticky note on top. In my subplans, I usually say, hey, this is the pink binder clip or this is the orange binder clip. But then just to, double check, I put a sticky note on the front with the subject and the time that the sub should be using that set of handouts. If I'm going to be absent for multiple days, I like to put all of the materials for each day inside of a plastic container, and then I label that container with the day on the front so there is no confusion. I've seen teachers do this a ton of different ways, so it doesn't matter how you do it as long as you are organizing the materials. Tip number 9, consider making a packet for each student. This works really well if you are self-contained. It doesn't work so well if you are departmentalized like I am, but the advantage of this is that the substitute will not have to pass out papers more than one time. Creating packets is also great for differentiation. If you want to leave different assignments for different students based on their ability levels, you can put them in a packet, have their name on it, and it makes it more discreet. I'll be honest, this does require some more work, up front, but I do think it is worth it in the long run, and your sub will thank you. Tip number 10, have early finisher options. It never fails that when you think an assignment is going to take students an hour to complete, they actually finish in 30 minutes, and then your substitute is left trying to figure out what to do. I recommend having a list of early finisher options that students can choose from and make them simple and fun activities such as multiplication war, things that don't require a lot of materials and the directions are pretty easy for students to comprehend. Better yet, you should always have early finisher options in your classroom and then have those as options when the substitute is here. That way students already know the routine and they're good to go. Also, make sure both your students and the substitute are aware of the early finisher options. Tip number 11, leave a slideshow to go with the subplans. I know this is not always an option depending on what your school has available for technology. Personally, our substitutes receive a guest logon for the computer. Once they get onto the computer, they can access our staff shared drive. I always leave a PowerPoint file within a folder in the shared drive, and I tell the substitute how to access it so they can go in, they can pull up the PowerPoint, and all of the slides coincide with my subplans. If your substitute does not have access to a shared drive, you could actually leave a flash drive and it could have just the PowerPoint file. That way they can plug it into the computer and open it up. Now, this is an extra step, but it does make it really easy to communicate directions with students. I usually put like a checklist on each slide for each different activity, and it helps the day go by more smoothly. Tip number 12, make certain things off limits. If there is anything at all in your classroom that you value, I highly suggest you don't let your students use it while you're gone, because there's a 99% chance it will be broken when you return. Okay, 99% is a bit of an exaggeration, but seriously. Personally, I don't let my students use my set of iPads while I am gone because I treasure them very much so, and I don't fully trust my students to use them when I'm not here. Make sure your substitute knows what is off limits. That way he or she can enforce the rules. Tip number 13, leave a treat for the sub. Subbing is hard work, and it is vital that you make sure your sub feels appreciated. I always leave a piece of chocolate, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, depending on how the week has been going with my students. That way the substitute can enjoy it at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, okay? I don't judge. You also could consider leaving like a $5 Starbucks gift card or change for the vending machine if you're feeling extra generous or if you're out for an extended period of time. Tip number 14, leave a feedback form. Having a specific feedback form for the substitute to fill out guarantees that you're gonna get, the right amount of information. If you only leave a piece of paper, the sub may just write, they were great or they were awful, and it doesn't give you a lot to really go off of to discuss the behavior with your students. My sub binder does include a sub report. On the sub report, I have the substitute fill in their contact information, absent students. They rate the day's behavior on a scale of 1 to 5. They list students who went above and beyond. They list students who had to be redirected, and then there's a spot for them to write any other detailed notes. I print off several copies of this sub report at the beginning of the year, stick them in the pocket of my sub binder, and then in my sub plans that I leave, I actually explicitly tell the substitute to fill out a form before he or she leaves. And finally, tip number 15, keep your sub binder updated. Look, creating a sub binder, that's fine and dandy, that's great, but you also have to update it. We all know our roster changes throughout the year, sometimes our schedule changes, sometimes our procedures change, so I recommend setting an alarm on your phone, maybe at the end of each month. That way you can go in, update your sub binder, and if you have to be out for an emergency, your sub will be good to go. Those are all of my tips. I really hope that these were helpful for you and gave you some ideas for the next time you are out. If you did enjoy the video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. As always, thank you for watching. I love you all so much. Don't forget to put your positive pants on, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video and for supporting my YouTube channel. If you want to check out any of my older videos, you can use the 2 links right down here. If you want to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos, you can use the link right up here. The links to all of my social media sites, my Teachers Pay Teacher store, my merchandise store, and my Amazon store are in the description box, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.